What is going on, guys? It's Jack Gills 1875 here, and today I'm bringing you the story of when Hertha II reached the Pokal Final. That's right, Hertha II, our reserve team, they reached the Pokal Final. Do not adjust your sets. So I'd like to thank everybody who picked this option on the Twitter poll. Obviously, the other option was the Hertha origin stories. I thought it was about time I made some Hertha content since I'm a Hertha fan. Obviously, the origin story is like the Hibs one, and that's what it was going to be like. But then I thought, well, I'll chuck in the story about when the Zweite Mannschaft reached the Pokal Final and see if people pick that, and you did, and I'm really happy about that because this is my favourite story from our club's history. As a Hertha fan, this is my favourite story from our club's history because it just sums up how we are as a club. You know, just a little bit of information in there for you. Our reserve team have been to a Pokal Final, obviously that 1993 Pokal Final, but our first team have never been to a Pokal Final. So there's a little bit of information for you there. So it just sums up as a club. It's just a fantastic story because these lads played with their hearts on their sleeve. They were amateurs. They put out some big clubs on the way to that 1993 final, and they just captured the hearts of not just my fellow Hertha fans, but just about every German football fan at the time. I think it's a story that when you talk about Hertha as a club, we don't talk about it enough. You know, even us as fans, we don't talk about it enough. And I think these lads deserve so much more recognition for the just sheer sort of size of the achievement. So basically this video is going to be me going through round by round all the way from the first round to the final, breaking down the games, explaining the sort of attention they got, how that sort of built up as the cup run went on, and yeah, just explaining the cup run basically and how much I love it as a Hertha fan. That's basically this video is going to work. I really hope you enjoy it, guys, because I really enjoyed making this one. I know I say that with all my videos because I do enjoy making my videos, but I really love making this one. You know, the only video that sort of tops how much I love making this one was the Hibs origin story, but I really love making this one. I'll tell you that right now off the bat because it's just so important to our club, and it's important to German football as well. I think it's uniquely DFB Pokal, a reserve team getting to the final. So it's not just unique to us as a club, but it's also unique to German football as well, because that would be like Hibs B getting to the Scottish Cup final, to put it into perspective there. So I think it is absolutely an absolutely astounding story, and I just absolutely love it. So let's jump right into it. I hope you enjoy the video. The 1992-93 DFB Pokal worked a little bit differently from the Pokal these days. Anybody that follows German football will notice that nowadays reserve teams aren't allowed to compete in the DFB Pokal. Well, back then that was different. Reserve teams were allowed to compete, which makes this story even more unique. So anyway, Hertha II got entered in at the second round along with all the other reserve teams. And Hertha II's first opponents would be SGK Heidelberg, who played in the lower leagues at the time. So it was a pretty easy tie for Hertha II, to be fair. Now, Hertha II at the time played in the NOVF Oberliga Mitte, which made up the third division. There was no Dritte Liga in the early 90s. The third division was regionalised, a bit like the fourth division these days. So that was pretty good, given that we as a club at the time weren't doing too well. We were stuck in the Zweite Bundesliga, or having a few financial problems. So to have quite a strong reserve team solidly competing in the third division was actually quite good. Now, Joachim Seigert's men had played 6 league games heading into the cup opener, and they'd won 3 and lost 3. So it wasn't too bad, because there was some big teams in the third division at the time, some big old East German teams like Chemie Leipzig and Halle FC. So, you know, it wasn't a bad start to the league campaign. And in there was a 5-0 win over Hertha Zehlendorf, another Berlin club, which was considered quite impressive. So only 487 people showed up at the Amateur Stadion for the cup opener. Now, this would change as the cup run progressed. Loads of people started cottoning on to what was going on, but at the time only 487 spectators showed up at the Amateur Stadion in the Olympia Park, where the reserves still play today, to watch their opening Pokal game against Heidelberg, and they were treated to a 3-0 confident home win. Holzbecker got a brace. He scored in the 7th minute and the 46th minute, while Milinkovic scored in the 27th minute. So that was an easy enough 3-0 win over SGK Heidelberg. Now, I couldn't find too much on this game, and that's why I'm just using random pictures of the reserves today as well, because there isn't too many pictures from the cup run back then either, which are which are free to use, you know, not stock photos or anything like that. Plus, it is pretty hard to find them, given there wasn't that many pictures taken, which I think's weird. I know in the early round it's to be expected because you're playing, a team like Heidelberg and everything like that. But I'm just going to do that warning now. There's not that many photos out there, so I do apologise for that. But they played SGK Heidelberg, a pretty confident 3-0 home win for Hertha II, and that was that. But little did anyone know that the journey in the Pokal was just beginning. Nobody knew what was to come. But that was that. Easy enough 3-0 home win for Hertha II in front of 487 of the Hertha faithful at the Amateurstadion in the Olympia Park. And it didn't really register that much attention. It got a tiny little bit in the Berliner Morgenspiegel, but nothing major, nothing that warranted attention, especially since there was more important things going on in the city and there was other football going on. Nobody really cared about the reserves. Not many other Hertha fans, many of my fellow Hertaners didn't really care that the reserves had beaten some team from down the divisions at all. So it hadn't really garnered that much attention, but nobody really knew what was to come. Nobody really knew that the Pokal journey was only just beginning and that there was to be more excitement on the way. So now Hertha II had to go into the third round and they faced a bit more of a difficult test. That might be a bit of an understatement. So let's move on to the third round. So Hertha II got past SGK Heidelberg in the second round. No great surprises there, but an altogether more difficult opponent faced them in the third round. And that opponent was Zweite Bundesliga side VfB Leipzig, or as you guys maybe know them, Lokomotiv Leipzig. Lokomotiv Leipzig were called VfB Leipzig in the 90s, and that's why I'm showing our reserves playing them in the Regionalliga Nordost last season, because I couldn't find any pictures of the game against VfB Leipzig at the time. So going into the third round tie, VfB Leipzig was sitting 5th in the Zweite Bundesliga, which made them firm favourites. They had also caused a bit of a shock in the previous round. They had beaten Dynamo Dresden 3-2. Now, Dynamo Dresden were in the Bundesliga at the time, so they had put out aside the division above them. So VfB Leipzig were firm favourites going into the game, and it was expected that Hertha II were going to seriously struggle and lose the game. But the 1,719 fans that went to the Amateurstadion, a bit more this time, probably because a big team had came to town and there's probably a few VfB Leipzig fans in there. But there was Hertaners, my fellow Hertaners were beginning to get a bit more interested at this point. The 1,719 fans at the Amateurstadion were treated to a good old DFB Pokal shock as Hertha II won 4-2. So how did the game go down? Well, Gesen put Hertha II 1-0 up in the 9th minute, and that stunned the whole crowd. But then Edmund managed to get the visitors from Leipzig level in the 44th minute, and it was expected, going into the second half, 1-1, that VfB Leipzig would just take the game because Hertha II would tire. Well, the exact opposite happened. Lehmann pulled off a bit of heroics, getting his brace, scoring the 52nd minute and the 58th minute to put Hertha II 3-1 up. Then Tarowski from VfB Leipzig did pull one back in the 74th minute before Kaiser for Hertha II in the 82nd minute firmly buried the game. And this caught a lot of people's attention. A lot of my fellow Hertaners that hadn't been too convinced about the Zweite Mannschaft, thinking they'd get beat, were like, wow, what's just happened here? They've beaten a well-established Zweite Bundesliga side and one of the big old traditional East German sides as well. What's happening here? It was, shock horror for a lot of people, and it was beginning to catch the attention of the press. The Alta Damas second string had beaten VfB Leipzig, who were expected to, do decently well, get a bit of a good Pokal run in there. And against the odds, Hertha II had reached the last 16, and people were really big in notes. This was a fantastic result. You're getting such a confident result against such a big team as VfB Leipzig was a massive achievement for Hertha II, and now they were heading to the round of 16, and the Pokal journey was beginning to pick up a bit more steam. Let's move on to that round of 16 game. So Hertha II, against the odds, had beaten VfB Leipzig and got into the round of 16. The round of 16 threw up another massively difficult game. They would face holders Hannover 96. Hannover 96 had won the DFB Pokal the previous year. Now, at the time, Hannover 96 was sitting 11th in the Zweite Bundesliga, which was really disappointing for them. They had a talented squad, and they really shouldn't have been in that place, but due to that, everybody knew they were going to fight nail and tooth to try and defend their DFB Pokal title. Everybody knew that Hanover were going to go into this game extra motivated. So in the previous round, they had beaten Bayer Erdogan 1-0 as well, which was a bit of a, well, I wouldn't say shock, but it was a bit unexpected given that Bayer Erdogan had a really talented side and were actually, doing quite well at the time. So Hanover 96 had beaten them 1-0 in a really tight game to get into the round of 16. So Hanover 96 were firm favourites. They were the defending champions, so they were going to fight nail and tooth for it. And despite, being in a place they really shouldn't have been in the Zweite Bundesliga, they were still a very good side, and a lot of people were saying a class apart from Hertha II. Now, due to a large travelling support coming down from Hanover, plus even greater interest from my fellow Herthaners, the Friedrich Ludwig Jahn Sport Park, one of Berlin's bigger stadiums, would be used for the game. And the 6,300 fans that attended the game were treated to high drama and a lot of entertainment as Hertha II ran out 4-3 winners. So how did the game go down? Well, I'll explain it right now. Heisig put the men from Niedersachsen 1-0 up in the 4th minute of the game before Kretschmer doubled their lead in the 48th minute. So Hanover 96 went into the break 1-0 up, okay, relatively comfortable. And then when they came out and went 2-0 up in the 48th minute, everybody was like, okay, it was nice whilst it lasted. Had to try put out VfB Leipzig. They can be proud of that. Getting around the 16 as a reserve team is quite a big achievement. It was nice whilst it lasted. But Hertha II had other ideas. Holzbecker in the 55th minute managed to get a goal back. So 2-1. Game's on now. Hertha II begin to get a bit of belief. Then in the 61st minute, the equaliser comes. Gezin, who had put Hertha II 1-0 up against VfB Leipzig in the previous round, sealed the equaliser in the 61st minute. Now we've got a game on our hands. Then in the 66th minute, Schmidt put Hertha II ahead. I can just imagine what it would have been like in our end of the stadium that day. It must have been absolutely crazy. So the reserves were winning 3-2. But then there was another turn. Sirox from Hanover 96 got an equaliser for them in the 74th minute. So it looked to be heading to extra time. It's sitting at 3-3. And then Schmidt, who had put Hertha II ahead, did it again. He got his brace in the 87th minute. Late drama. Hertha II go on 4-3. They won the game. Everybody in the stadium, and I think everybody in Germany that had watched the game, was like, what the hell is going on? Hertha II, from 2-0 down, had come back and won 4-3. Because nobody was expecting them to survive extra time. Once Hanover had equalised in the 74th minute, everybody was like, nah, there's no way Hertha II are surviving extra time. There's just no way at all that they will survive extra time. But they went on and won the game. And they dumped out the holders of the cup, the defending champions. And now the whole of Germany and a lot more of my fellow Herthaners were looking on going, oh wow, this is quite interesting. Hertha II have just dumped out the reigning champions and are in the quarter-final. A reserve team is in the quarter-final. And to add the pressure on even further, our first team had been eliminated by Bayer Leverkusen. So now it was all down to the boobies, as we call them. And it's Berlinish slang for the juniors. It was all down to the young lads, the reserve team, the young guns, to represent the Alte Dame, our club, in the DFB Pokal, and now a huge quarter-final was ahead of them. Let's move on to the quarter-final. So obviously by this point, Hertha II were the talk of the media in Germany because a reserve team were in the last 8. Nobody had seen that before. It was unthinkable. Nobody thought it could happen. And now they're beginning to speculate how far our plucky amateurs really could go, especially since they topped the first team. They went further than the senior team. However, standing in the way of a semi-final place was the biggest challenge yet. Bundesliga side Erste FC Nürnberg, who are Germany's giant traditional sides. They're a class apart from anything Hertha II played before, even high-flying VfB Leipzig. Nürnberg were just an absolute class apart. And in the previous round, they'd beaten a talented Hamburg side 4-2. And coming into the cup tie, they were sitting comfortably mid-table in the top flight. So 2 divisions above Hertha II. And at that point, we were sitting sort of just outside the mid-table in the Oberliga Mitte. So it was an absolutely huge ask. And many, including my fellow Hertaners, were going, you know what, this is a step too far. It's nice we got to the quarter-final, but it's good night, Irene. We think, Nuremberg are absolutely flying in the Bundesliga right now. They're solidly mid-table. They've been getting some good results. They put out a talented Hamburg side in the previous round. So, yeah, we think this is a step too far. But like with the Hanover game, the lads had different ideas. So this tie would be played at Tennis Borussia Berlin's Mommsenstadion. Now, if you know Berlin, you know Mommsenstadion is a fantastic ground. And this time, Hertha II received a bumper crowd of 13,700, many of which were my fellow Hertaners that were really beginning to back the reserves, especially now since the senior side had been put out by Bayer Leverkusen. And many Hertha fans or non-Berliners were showing up as well to sort of get a look at this spectacle, and plus you obviously had some Nuremberg away support as well. So the match was a pretty cagey affair and only really came alive in the last half an hour, and Hertha II ran out 2-1 winners. So how did the match go down? Well, like I said, it was a pretty cagey affair, but in the 69th minute, Zimmermann managed to put Hertha II, the Hertha Boobies, 1-0 up. Nobody could believe what they were witnessing. Hertha II were 1-0 up against Bundesliga opposition, but it would all come crashing down 20 minutes later as Bauerle from Nuremberg in the 89th minute made it 1-1, and everybody was dreading. They thought, right, this time it's over. We go to extra time. Nuremberg are going to have more in the tank. Wheel tyre. That's it. It's not going to happen. But again, Hertha II had other ideas, and that man Lehmann, who was the hero against Hanover, was the hero that yet again is in the 90th minute, only a minute after Nuremberg's equaliser. Lehmann slotted home the winner. The Mommsenstadion must have been absolutely crazy. 2-1 Hertha II. They had eliminated a Bundesliga side, a side 2 divisions above them, and now they were in the DFB Pokal last 4. No one, and I mean no one, could believe what they were witnessing. They were actually going insane in the media. The media were like, what is going on here? Kicker were printing 8-page articles all about it. Everybody in Germany was going, what is going on here? This was like destroying the status quo here. A reserve team were in the semi-final. They had put out the mighty Nuremberg. And now they had also become darlings of the tournament. These were lads that this time last year were playing the likes of Stahl Thalle and Chemie Leipzig and Magdeburg and Hertha Zehlendorf and Tasmania Berlin. They weren't playing big teams, and now all of a sudden they were doing better than the senior men's side and were putting out teams like Nuremberg and were in a semi-final. Nobody could believe what they were saying. It was just absolute astonishment in German football. And like I said, they become the darlings of the tournament. Everybody was wanting them to do well. Everybody was willing them on. Everybody was getting behind the Hertha Boobies, the Hertha Juniors. And now they faced a semi-final. They were in the last 4, and we're now going to talk about that semi-final. Hertha II were now in the last 4, and one game separated them from a DFB Pokal final. All eyes turned to the capital as they faced Chemnitzer FC. Now, Chemnitzer FC were another shock addition to the semi-finals after they had beaten a very talented Werder Bremen side 2-1 after extra time in the quarter-final. Now, Chemnitzer FC at the time were a fairly solid Zweite Bundesliga outfit and headed into the tie comfortably in the upper half of the table. Now, I've had to use pictures of Hertha II playing Chemnitzer FC in the Regionalliga Nordost last season, as there were no pictures from that game, which is weird given it was a semi-final. But anyway, while Chemnitzer FC would provide a stern test, Hertha II were actually sort of favourites on the basis of the giant killings they'd done before. They'd eliminated VfB Leipzig, they'd eliminated the holders, Hannover 96, and they put out Nuremberg, who were a solidly mid-table, very talented Bundesliga side. So Hertha II were sort of favourites, and all of Germany watched on in anticipation as Hertha II looked to go all the way and make a piece of club history. So this time, a huge crowd of mostly my fellow Herthaners was expected for the game, so the decision was taken to play the game at the Olympiastadion. This was huge for the reserve boys. They would be playing in front of a home crowd in the Olympiastadion, and the attendance on that March evening was 56,500 people. That is crazy. If you think about it, at the start of the tournament, at the start of the Pokal, when they played Heidelberg, they played in front of 487. They're now playing in front of 56,500. And bear in mind, in the league, in the Oberliga Mitte, they'd only be playing against, in front of, crowds of maybe a few hundred. So to play in front of 56,500 people, all cheering you on, obviously it was mostly Herthaners. I estimate about 80% of the crowd were fellow Herthaners, and I wish I was there on that night. I might have to invent the time machine and go back to watch that game. Whilst it was mostly Herthaners, there was also well-wishers from other parts of Germany, neutrals, and of course Chemnitzer FZ travelling support. They'd made the trip up from southern Saxony, all the way up from southern Saxony. But still, it was mostly Herthaner. Like I said, it was probably about 80% of the capacity were Herthaners. So they looked on as Hertha II looked to make a piece of club history, and that crowd was treated to that as they ran out 2-1 winners. So how did that game go down? Well, it was actually done in the first half. Ramilov put Hertha II 1-0 up in the 5th minute before Meyer made it 2 in the 22nd minute, and all Chemnitzer FZ could muster was a pen from Heydrich in the 36th minute, which, he dispatched that perfectly fine. Heydrich scored that. So Hertha II had done it. As a reserve team, they reached the DFB Pokal Final, the centrepiece of German football. Hertha fans in the stadium, like I said, I wish I'd invented the time machine so I could be there on that night. They must have been going crazy. Looked on in disbelief as the second string, the reserves, effectively the juniors, had done something that the first team had never done before. No Hertha team had ever done before. Not even the Wundermannschaft we had in the 30s had even done this before. They had reached a DFB Pokal Final. The German media and public were firmly on Hertha II's side. They were in love with them. And like I said, it was all over the papers, like I was saying for the previous round when they'd done it. This time, it was really all over the papers. The Tagesschau was speaking about it. It was on the news. They even had the Chancellor and the Mayor of Berlin congratulating them. It was absolutely huge. This wasn't just a moment of club history for us that a Hertha side had reached a Pokal final. This was also a moment of German football in history. A reserve team had gone all the way from that first game against Heidelberg to the final. Hertha II now had a final to prepare for. It was absolutely huge, and no matter what, Hertha fans were immensely proud. But people were beginning to believe, could Hertha II do the unthinkable? Could they go all the way? Well, they had to prepare for it, and let's move on to that final. It wasn't to end the way the people expected. Let's move on to that now. The stage was set. Hertha BSC 2, Hertha BSC's reserves, would take on a star-studded Bayer Leverkusen side in one of the most hotly anticipated DFB Pokal finals ever. Bayer Leverkusen, to be fair, had a fairly easy run to the final. In the first round, they had dispatched with ASV Bergedorf. In the second round, they had beaten Kaiserslautern. In the third round, they had eased past VfB Heilbronn. In round of 16, they ironically put out the Hertha first team, as we were talking about earlier on. They beat them 1-0, which put the pressure on Hertha II to avenge the first team. They then beat Karlsruhe 2-0 in the quarterfinals before they romped home to an impressive 3-0 win against Eintracht Frankfurt in the semis. So Bayer Leverkusen had a very impressive run and hadn't really been challenged throughout that run. And Bayer Leverkusen in the 90s were a really impressive side. They had some really talented players, and they'd finished 5th in the Bundesliga and were really unlucky to miss out on a Champions League spot. So Hertha II, to say the least, had their work cut out, but many believed the ultimate shock was round the corner. Many believed they could win this DFB Pokal. They'd beaten Nuremberg. Nuremberg hadn't been that far off Bayer Leverkusen in the table, so they believed that Hertha II could do this. So yet again, they play to a large crowd of mainly my fellow Herthaners. However, there was a lot of Bayer Leverkusen fans, and obviously a Pokal final attracts neutrals from all over Germany. And then again, there was well-wishers coming to witness the plucky reserve side that had stolen the country's hearts. So the final official attendance in the final, although they reckon there was a few more people that got in without tickets, as usually happened before the old security tightened up in the mid-2000s, the official attendance was 76,391. So that was compared to 487 people in the first round. So they play, and I'd say roughly about 60% of that were Herthaners, my fellow Herthaners. So it was a really good home crowd for them. Tickets sold like hotcakes. Like I said, a lot of people got in without a ticket, those naughty people, but I can understand why they would have wanted to go. Now, whilst Hertha II played with passion, unfortunately, it just wasn't to be. And the Pokal final really was a step too far. Now, like I said, Hertha II in the final, they played a lot of spirit, they played with a lot of passion. At times, they played Bayer Leverkusen off the park, but unfortunately, Bayer Leverkusen's quality shone through, and in the 77th minute, Leverkusen's star striker, Ulf Kirsten, who I'm sure many of you that know about East German football in particular would have heard that name before. Obviously, Dynamo Dresden's star striker before reunification, and very good for both the East German national team and the United German national team. He scored, and that proved to be enough. At the final hurdle, Hertha II were undone. And our wait for Pokal glory would have to continue, and it is continuing. Hopefully this year's the year, but unfortunately Hertha II could not stand the final test. And like I said, they played with so much spirit. The atmosphere must have been amazing in that stadium, but unfortunately Bayer Leverkusen were just too much. Bayer Leverkusen's talented squad were just too much, but people were immensely proud. Despite losing the final, they were viewed as heroes amongst the Hertha support base. Even today, I know they say don't get talked about much, but the older Hertha fans that were around at the time still view them as heroes, and they get uttered in the same sentence as the legendary team in the 30s that won back-to-back German championships. So they were heroes. They had done something that no other Hertha team could do. They got to a DFB Pokal final, and they were runners-up. As reserves, as amateurs, they were taking runners-up medals home. Nobody would have expected that. When they beat Heidelberg in the first round, people are going, okay, right, they're not going to get any further than that. You know, that first game, nobody expected them to go any further. They would have got beaten in the third round, but it didn't happen. They got all the way to the final, and they got runners-up medals. So everybody was immensely proud of them, and rightly so. And yeah, Bayer Leverkusen has won the cup, but it was actually Hertha II that was still being talked about, how this was an achievement that people couldn't really sort of fathom. You know, it was something that people were still trying to catch up with. A reserve team had got to the final, putting out three very talented sides. And then, yeah, Chemnitzer FC and Heidelberg as well. Chemnitzer FC, I think, didn't really play well in that semi-final, but they put out three very talented sides in the form of VfB Leipzig, Hannover 96 and Nuremberg. So to get to the final, and you know, especially the run they'd had, it was absolutely fantastic, and they'd done something, like I said, that no Hertha team had ever done before. So it was a great source of pride, and the guys were given a hero's welcome by the Hertha fans when the new Oberliga Mitte started. They were given a huge round of applause on the pitch, and they got a good crowd at that game. So definitely, from the view of a legacy, they are still heroes, and they're held in the same esteem as that Hertha team of the 30s that won back-to-back German championships. And it's such a momentous achievement, and it's something that no Hertha team has ever done since, and no reserve team has ever managed to replicate that when reserve teams are allowed to compete, and no reserve team will ever replicate it again because reserve teams are now banned from competing in the Pokal. So that's something that the lads will always have to keep. Nowadays, Hertha II were in the Regionalliga Nordost, we're in the 4th division, and we're purely focused on youth development. We don't really want to go up into the higher leagues, and we just focus on plodding along and churning out good young players. But because of the way German footballs went, we ended up playing two of the sides regularly that we put out on the way to that final. We play Chemnitzer FC and Lokomotiv Leipzig regularly in the Regionalliga Nordost now, which is a bit ironic if you think about it. They're a bit of a zeitgeist if you think about it. So that was Hertha TII's crowning triumph, and I think the team have a right to be, immensely proud of themselves. And these players these days, if you ever see them in Berlin, if you ever see a player, especially players like Zimmerman and that, don't be afraid to buy them a beer, buy them a pint, because they are legends. They had got into a DFB Pokal Final as the reserves. So don't be afraid if you see one of them. They probably don't look anything like their pictures these days from there in these days. But if you see them out in Berlin, don't be afraid to buy them a pint, because they're heroes. So that concludes my story of Hertha II getting to a DFB Pokal Final. Let's cut to the outro. And that was the story of when Hertha II reached a Pokal final. I think it's enough to steal anybody's heart. Even if you're not a football fan properly, or you're not a Hertha fan like myself, it could steal anybody's heart, that story, because, like I said, it's something that I just don't think you can really come to terms with. A reserve team got to a National Cup final. It's coming from a Scottish or English perspective, where reserve teams play in their own leagues and they play in their own competitions, it's something that we just completely can't understand now. I think even now, the younger German football fan from Germany, or any younger German football fans that know German football from outside of Germany, will go, it's still something that's hard to believe, because reserve teams aren't allowed to compete in the Pokal anymore. So I do think it's a huge achievement. And like I said, as a Hertaner, it's a story that really spoke to me. And it's a story that from the first time I got told it, it's like, wow, I love that. And that reserve team of the 92-93 season are a great interest of mine. I've always look at clips of them playing their league games, and I always try and find out information about the players. And if I'm ever in Berlin, I'm going to try and look out for some of them, because, like I said in that segment about the final, they're heroes. Despite the fact they lost, they're heroes. And they are held in the same esteem as the Wundermannschaft we had in the 30s, because what they did was monumentous. No Hertha team had got to a Pokal final before that, and the reserves done it, and we're still waiting for it. We're still waiting for Pokal success. We're still waiting for the senior team to get to a final. So those lads really did do a good job. When you look at the state of the reserve team now, which is in a good place, but more focused on youth development, and we always come sort of mid to lower table in the Regionalliga Nordost, to think that they were A, sitting mid-table in the Oberliga Mitte, the third division at the time, and B, they got to a Pokal final, is absolutely outstanding. And like I said, it's just a story that I absolutely love. It's beautifully unique to us as a club, and it's beautifully unique to German football. And what a run. Like I said, they put out some very talented teams. You're putting out the previous holders, beating that Nuremberg team, giving Bayer Leverkusen a really good run for their money in the final. That's it's absolutely amazing. I'm sort of lost for words as to how amazing that really, really is. So what I'm going to say is, I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. I hope you found this story as heartwarming, as interesting as I did when I first found out about it. And maybe I've recruited a few more Hertha fans, knowing that our reserve team managed to get to a final. But so hopefully you really enjoyed the video, guys, because I really love making this one. When it's clubs I support, like even if I do anything about the High Bs, or I do anything about Hertha, I always really love doing it and give it that little extra bit of special attention, because it is a club I support. So yeah, I really, really love making this one. And like I said repeatedly throughout this video, it's a story that I really, really love as a Hertha fan. So I really hope you enjoyed the video, guys. So remember to leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing, because it's nice, and you're going to get some unique footballing content that you don't see anywhere else. Women's football, German football, Scottish football. I have it all in here, Soviet football. So make sure you do drop a subscribe for unique footballing content. I'll see you all in a while. Jack out.